ultimately China's producing this product, refining and smelting particularly, much, much cheaper and at much larger scale than almost anybody else's. What do you see as a strategy and a plan, not just for the UK, but for those, let's say, non-China allies, or whatever, however you want to frame it? Do you see that ever getting off the ground? And what steps do you think could be those first few steps to try and make that happen?
So I think there are, lots of overlapping efforts to make some progress on cooperation on critical minerals, but largely they've been almost diplomatic efforts with international treaties, etc. They
pointless.
Well,
I think it's what we really want to know.
Yes, I mean they don't really have much to stand on, and what's really needed is to think about these things instead of thinking about these things as sort of diplomatic projects. They should be thought of as investment projects, and there should be a much more concerted effort to form focused partnerships with specific countries, maybe 2 or 3 countries that have an interest in a specific supply chain, in order to bring businesses around the table from each of these areas and governments around the table, and actually think about what kind of deal structure would work, what kind of specific bit of infrastructure investment project are we trying to deliver in order to actually diversify our imports from China. In the case of critical minerals, I think a lot of the sort of focus should be, going forward, should be on where could we develop new refineries and processing plants outside of China, and how could we use the capital that we have in the UK and in other allied countries like the EU to actually help finance that. And some of that has to be public capital because, left on its own, the market underinvests in resilience. It's not necessarily going to develop the most resilient supply chains without additional public funding.
How much visibility do you have on the EU, which is obviously the US is doing that thing? The only other party who's really got kind of perhaps sufficient scale might be the EU. How much are they doing in terms of they've got resource.eu, but actually kind of working out, okay, we've got a risk in this mineral, this mineral, this mineral. We want to have refining and smelting somewhere, either in the EU or outside the EU, and we're going to put some money behind it. Is there kind of a granular plan that they have, or they're developing, or no? I'm not sure.
It doesn't appear to be a granular plan as such, but there's sort of movements around rules of origin for batteries, for example, which sort of try to almost regulate a sort of an alternative supply chain, but it's still not necessarily putting in place the incentives for these projects to be built around the world. It's, for example, with rare earths, there could be potential for example, Malaysia to expand their capacity of rare earths processing, but it's quite hard to see how a regulation like the rules of origin, which is a few steps removed from that specific investment, it's hard to see how that quickly gets you an investment project off the ground.
And the UK government, in terms of trying to wrangle the cats into some sort of bag, is there anybody, is DBT very active on this, or anybody? Because I mean, it's beyond the scale of the UK, so I'm just wondering how much the UK is trying to pull.
So, I mean, the most obvious effort to point to is the Global Clean Power Alliance, which the government is trying to convene many economies that have an interest in clean power and the supply chains within that. Unfortunately, that is very limited in scope. It's tied to the government's clean power mission, so its focus is very much on sort of energy infrastructure supply chains, and therefore there's lots of, I think that could be a vehicle for collaboration on cabling and other parts of the supply chain. But when it comes to things like batteries, there are gaps, and so that setup isn't necessarily working. What that needs is a sort of a layer underneath that, which says, okay, we have these 80-odd countries who are interested in have declared their interest through the Global Clean Power Alliance. Now, can we set up some focused working groups to think through in specific investment projects that would help diversify our imports?
We're basically going to need to build syndicates, aren't we, to mobilise the finance to basically build these facilities outside China?
I would say, for example, going all the way back to the 50s, the International Energy Agency was set up as an oil stockpile in response to a shock to fossil fuel supplies. We're going to need to rethink in this new era of supply chains and technologies what sort of international agencies, what sort of capabilities would they need, and ultimately these partnerships have to come up with new institutions that have genuine powers to do something